Thank you everybody for being here. I'm really excited about this presentation on resources for youth homelessness. We're really excited to have everybody with us. My name is Ethan Johnstone. I am the lead community builder for PrideLink, a community-based nonprofit that serves the LGBTQ plus community in the Upstate through health and wellness services, access to resources, social support, and also providing capacity building, cultural competence, education and training to local community providers and partners. I am really excited to be joined today by Josh Crocker, Youth Resource Center Director with Pendleton Place, and he'll get a chance to introduce himself in just a second. This webinar is part of our new programming, PrideLink Online, and it's in direct response to the coronavirus and social distancing and safety guidelines. We knew that even in the midst of those guidelines, it was still really important for the LGBTQ plus community to have access to social support spaces and information and resources that affect us all. And it can be really difficult to know what resources exist, especially now. So we're hoping that this is helpful in navigating through all of that. So before we get started, I want to just mention that all attendees' audio and video is going to stay muted throughout the webinar, but we want to make sure that you get your questions answered on this topic. So you'll see a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions, please be sure to put those in the Q&A box, and we'll answer those throughout the webinar. So let's get started. Josh, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you do there?
Yeah, so like Ethan said, my name is Josh Crocker. I am the Youth Resource Center Director at Pendleton Place. I am born and raised in Upstate, South Carolina. I'm from Union originally, which if you haven't heard of Union, then I'm not surprised. If you have heard of Union, it may not be for great Union reasons, but who knows. I lived in Greenville for about 3 years now. I was in Anderson about 10 before that. So Upstate is most definitely home. In Pendleton Place, we have a long history of working in child welfare. So for a very, very long time, we were a foster care home for pretty much birth to 18, but we've kind of evolved over the years, and we still have a foster group home on site, but we have expanded our services to provide a fuller continuum of services, including foster care intake in our assessment center, and now our youth resource center. So our particular program is only not even a year old. We launched in July of last year, and we serve youth ages 17 to 24 experiencing or at greater risk of homelessness.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. So tell us a little bit about what it looks like in the Upstate as far as, how many youth are experiencing homelessness. What does it look like for youth experiencing homelessness? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so one important thing to note is that when we talk about youth experiencing homelessness, there's kind of two ways that they're counted. And for youth 18 and up, so 18 to 24 is kind of the age range that we use. The definition for homelessness there, or the way that those folks are counted or is considered as homeless or experiencing homelessness, is that they are living in a place not meant for human habitation, or they are living in emergency shelters. So they could be living on the streets, they could be living in literally encampments in the woods, they could be living in an abandoned building. So when we talk about 18 to 24, that's kind of the definition. It's a little more strict. But we get into a younger age range, say 12 to 17-year-olds, that definition of homelessness is a little bit broader. And so it could also include, youth who are couch surfing, who are living in hotels for short periods of time with family members, who are doubled up with multiple families living under one household. So there's kind of two distinctions there, and that matters because it tells us how we can look at the numbers that we have on homelessness, right? So for the 18 to 24-year-old age range, for sheltered youth, our most recent data shows that in upstate South Carolina, in a 1-year period, there were 298 youth ages 18 to 24 who were living in shelters in upstate South Carolina. And our data also tells us that about a third of people who stay in shelters were living on the street before they came in. So it's reasonable to assume that a large number of those 298 youth were living unsheltered before they came into the shelter. And the unsheltered number, so those who were literally living on the streets, living in those encampments and abandoned buildings for 18 to 24-year-olds, was 110 youth in a 1-year period. For minors, those numbers change quite a good bit. For unsheltered youth who are experiencing homelessness, there were about 136 of those in a 1-year period, ages 13 to 17. But for those who were living in that kind of broader definition of homelessness that I mentioned earlier, they're pretty large numbers. For grades 9 through 12, that includes 1,087 individuals, and for grades 6 to 8, it's 1,287, 1,287. So it's a large number of students in our schools who are experiencing homelessness. And that distinction, I think, for me, my personal opinion is outside of all the other things, is that I think all of those things are considered homelessness, even though the 18 to 24-year-olds who are couch surfing or doubled up aren't currently being counted as homeless. To me, that's still homelessness, because you don't have a place to lay your head that's your own, right? That's safe and secure and stable. And it's really difficult to count youth experiencing homelessness because they're often hiding in plain sight. I think a lot of times when we hear the term homeless, or we think of, if we construct in our mind an idea of what a homeless person may look like, we kind of come up with this caricature of a person, right? That's a little bit detached from a reality. But I think not only is that caricature probably a little bit inaccurate and unfair, but especially when it comes to young adults and youth experiencing homelessness, they often are just kind of plain clothes, look like, your everyday person. They want to blend in. They want to look, especially if they're in school, they want to look like they're, clean cut and fresh and have, fresh clothes on. And so you may not know if you pass a young adult experiencing homelessness on the street, because they probably look like everybody else. So it becomes difficult not only to notice them, but also in counting, because they're a lot better at hiding and being resourceful and connecting with friends and couch surfing than some of our older populations.
Yeah, thanks for that description and those stats. I think it's important to the point that you brought up of, the data that we have is probably somewhat limited because of those barriers to counting and sort of hiding in plain sight. So thanks.
Yeah.
What do we know about specifically the percentage of youth who are experiencing homelessness that identify as LGBTQ plus?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we know that they're disproportionately represented, right? So national estimates are that about 7% of young adults identify as LGBTQ. And yet when we look at young adults and youth experiencing homelessness, about 40% of that number of young adults identify as LGBTQ. And so when you have, a portion of the population which is so small, less than 10%, making up for more than 40% of the population that's experiencing homelessness, it's really kind of this astronomical difference, right? And so they are disproportionately affected. And in fact, some studies suggest that LGBTQ youth are 120% more likely to experience homelessness than individuals who are cisgendered and heterosexual. And locally, we know that those numbers kind of match up. So as I mentioned before, we only opened in July of last year. But since we opened in July, out of all of the youth who have come through the drop-in center since we opened in July, about a third of those identify as LGBTQ youth. And so we find that our data is on track with the national average. So the representation of LGBTQ youth experiencing homelessness in Greenville, South Carolina, in the upstate of South Carolina is pretty much on par with what we're seeing across the United States.
Yeah, thanks. And can you talk a little bit about why those numbers, those youth who are LGBTQ are so high? Why is it that disproportionate rate of youth experiencing homelessness are in that population?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think unfortunately the most commonly reported reason for that is because of familial rejection. And so they have an LGBTQ youth has come out to a family member, has come out to a guardian that they're living with, that's caring for them, and that family member, that guardian, has then rejected them because of that young adult's identity as part of the queer community. So that's the most common reason, and I think that is most certainly on track with what we see here in the upstate, especially as we are admittedly in the Bible Belt, and a lot of our families probably are accustomed to and maybe ascribe to religious beliefs that may seem to conflict with someone with a youth's LGBTQ identity. And so unfortunately, we see sometimes that the result of that is that young adult is kicked out of their house. So the most common cause is familial rejection, which is very, very sad, but unfortunately the case. Other causes include they may have aged out of the foster care system, poverty, some type of abuse that they've experienced, or ongoing abuse, or they fled for their own safety, or a combination of all of these things. So it's really unfortunate, but we find that not only are LGBTQ youth, more vulnerable and more susceptible to these kinds of hardships because of their identities at such a young age, but then they're put in an even more vulnerable situation of experiencing homelessness or being unstably housed, which just exacerbates all of these existing problems. So it's really, really unfortunate, but that's what we know so far about youth who are experiencing homelessness who are part of the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, thanks for that. And just a reminder that, we are taking questions. So I know that this information might be really new for a lot of folks that are attending the webinar today. So any questions that you have along the way, feel free to go ahead and enter those into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get those answered either during or definitely save some time at the end. So you talked a little bit about who is experiencing homelessness, why LGBTQ youth are at greater risk of experiencing homelessness. So what happens when a queer or trans youth is homeless and they try to access services? Do they access them at the same rate as other youth or adults experiencing homelessness? What does that sort of landscape and process look like?
Sure. Yeah. Well, we know that they're not accessing at the same rate because of a variety of factors, including discrimination, and maybe this fear that their identity won't be honored, that their gender identity won't be honored, that they will be discriminated against because of their sexual orientation, and unfortunately, we know that many service providers across several different practices and professions may not be the most educated in how to serve the LGBT community in an inclusive and trauma-informed way. And so, yeah, I think fear of discrimination is a huge motivator, especially when, many of the services that we have in the Upstate in the context of the Bible Belt often are tied to and attached to religious organizations. If you were kicked out of your home because of your family's religious belief, and then you were the only services that you know of are at this other religious organization, then you're probably not going to go there. So you may be put in an even more vulnerable situation where someone might take advantage of you and may put you in a situation where you're having to make choices you wouldn't normally make, but you would rather do that than go somewhere where you're going to kind of reopen those old wounds of pain and discrimination, right? So yeah. It's really unfortunate. Yeah.
Thanks for just giving that sort of snapshot of what happens when a queer or trans youth becomes homeless and what happens, when they access services. So we had a question and it ties into exactly where we're going. So what services does the Youth Resource Center provide specifically for youth experiencing homelessness, and then LGBTQ plus youth as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Youth Resource Center is fully inclusive, fully welcoming, and affirming of all identities and backgrounds. We've been really intentional with the way that we've structured our facility, and even with signage. We've got, a few LGBTQ flags or posters up in various locations, including being really intentional about the way that we have some of our services framed. So I guess let me not put the cart before the horse before the cart, whichever one that is. So the services that we offer, we have drop-in hours Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. And what that means is somebody can literally walk up off the street into our center. They don't have to have an appointment. They don't have to show us any kind of ID card or prove that they are who they say they are. We are a no barrier facility. And so if they show up and they look like they're in our age range and there's no visible concern for safety that our staff can see, then they can come inside and access our services. And then once they're inside, we have an independent living specialist that can provide them with case management so that she can help them identify goals and kind of break down those goals into more palatable action steps. So somebody wants to, maybe a young adult was kicked out of their home before they finished high school. They really want to get their GED, but they have no idea where to even start. She can help them with that and connect them with the appropriate service and kind of break that down in a way that it is less daunting and a bit easier to understand. Because if you've never gone through that before, how would you know what you were doing, right? If you didn't have somebody to help you along. We also have rapid rehousing services. So youth who meet that more specific definition I mentioned earlier of being literally homeless and living on the street or in a shelter, we can help them get housed quickly in an apartment or a living unit that has their name on the lease. So it is theirs. It isn't. It's not in Pendleton Place's name. It's not in the YRC's name. It is their apartment for them to live in and work towards independence and self-sufficiency. We also have street outreach where we go into communities and we go into other providers who are interacting with the population that we serve on a regular basis, which has changed a little bit because of COVID, which I think we'll get to in a second. But it is something we're striving to continue to do. And then we just have basic need services. So folks can come in and get a hot meal. They can get emergency food and fill up a grocery bag to go if they need to. We've got laundry facilities on site so they can wash and dry their clothes. We have a shower where they can, get freshened up. We have a computer lab they can use to, access resume building services, or if they need to search for apartments, if they need to search for jobs, or if they just want to connect with their friends for a little bit on social media, they're welcome to do that too. And then a resource closet that's full of clothing items and shoes and hygiene products and makeup and all the things. And then we also have reproductive health products. And so, that's one of the areas where we try to be really intentional about the language that we use. If you go into, we have a full bathroom and a half bathroom here. And if you go into the half bath, there's a little shelf on your right that has reproductive and hygiene products that are free for anyone to take as needed. And even the language that we use on those products and how they're not gendered, but simply called what they are, to make sure that everyone knows that they're welcome to them if they need them. We wanted to make sure that everything that we did was intentional in communicating to the young adults that come into our center that however they arrive when they get here, they're welcome as that person, whether it's part of the LGBTQ community, whatever their history may be, whether they were in foster care or not, it really doesn't matter. And when they're here, we're not going to do anything to try to change them. We just want to try to help them to reach the goals that they've set for themselves and working towards self-sufficiency and independence.
Awesome. Thank you. Can you share where Pendleton Place and the Youth Resource Center is located and the phone number? And in the recording, we'll include that in a text as well.
Yes, absolutely. So the address for the Youth Resource Center, if you Google Pendleton Place, it'll be a slightly different address. It's actually the building that's two down from us. But our building's address is 1139 Pendleton Street. And it is in Greenville. A lot of people hear Pendleton and they think we're in Pendleton. And we're not. We're in Greenville, but we are on Pendleton Street. So 1139 Pendleton Street. And if you're familiar with kind of the downtown West End area, if you're coming from downtown toward Easley, when you come to that red light with the Academy with Academy Street with the Sphinx on your right, you'll take a right toward the West Village, and we're the third building on your left. But if you come to us, if you put 1139 in your GPS, there is a big empty parking lot right across the street from us that the folks who own it have said we can use for our folks to park at. And so you can park in that lot, and then we're the only building that you'll see across from you that doesn't have a big black gate in front of it. And you can walk straight up to our front door. If you're not able to get to us, or if you want to call and talk to somebody or have some more questions, you can call the number 864-516-1226. That's 516-1226.
Awesome, thanks. And then one question that we just had is, are these services for folks just in Greenville or the entire upstate counties surrounding them?
all of Upstate. Anybody's welcome to come see us. We unfortunately, because of capacity, don't have the ability to provide transportation outside of Greenville County. But if you can get to us, you are more than welcome to come access our services.
Perfect. So you started talking a little bit about, how your organization and Youth Resource Center services are set up to really provide a welcoming environment. But, we know that because of the cultural, political, legal landscape that, seeking services for the LGBTQ plus community can be really scary because of, for good reason, they've experienced discrimination. So
yeah,
to talk a little bit more about, what it looks like when a queer or trans person comes to access services, what about the facility or the process would make them feel affirmed and welcomed?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically what it looks like when a person comes to us for the first time is, say they come during drop-in hours, we'll let them know that we typically like to give folks a tour the first time they come to see us, so they have a lay of the land and figure out, where the exits are if they need to dart real quick and aren't feeling it. And then after they've had a tour, we let them know that we want to have about 10 minutes or so to do kind of a standard intake that we do with everyone the first time they come in. But we let them do that at their own leisure. So if they want to, grab something to eat first, or if they are just really tired and have had a long day and they want to take like a quick 20-minute nap on the couch, or if they want to take a shower first, that's totally fine. We just ask that they give us about 10 to 15 minutes before they leave. And then when they give us those 10 to 15 minutes, we have a paper form survey for them to fill out when they come see us. And that's their opportunity to tell us what they want us to know about them, including their name, which doesn't have to be, a legal name, because we don't ask for ID. So if they have a name that's different from the state issued ID that they have on them, that's the name that we call them. That's who they are to us. And then that's also their opportunity for them to share with us their gender identity, their sexual orientation, and any other important information that they would want us to have while they're here. But we also make it really clear that they're welcome to share as much or as little information as they want. So if we have someone that comes in and says, my name is Bob, but I don't really know about my sexual orientation, or I don't really feel comfortable sharing that, I don't know you people, that's fine. You're welcome to not share anything with us, and it's not going to change how we treat you. It's not going to change the services that you access. It has absolutely no bearing on the way that you're going to be treated or what you're going to be able to do while you're here at the YRC. So we like to capture that information because it informs, the statistics that we shared earlier, and that's important because we want folks to know, who's being affected by these kinds of issues. But it is certainly in 110% at the level of comfort of the people who come into our doors. We don't push, we don't pry. Whatever you want to share, you're more than welcome to share, but we won't ask you to do more than that.
Awesome, thanks. So let's talk specifically about how this issue of youth homelessness looks sort of in the current context of the pandemic. Have you seen an increase? Have you seen a decrease? What does that look like for y'all?
Right, in these unprecedented times, as everyone says, right? We have actually seen an increase. It's been really interesting. I believe our percentage between March and April, and increase in foot traffic that we saw in drop-in hours, we saw 164% increase in people coming during drop-in hours. So it's been really interesting. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, probably some that I can't account for. But I know a lot of other service providers have had to adjust the services that they're able to offer, or, depending on how their staff have been affected, or if their staff are even at risk populations, they may have had to close altogether. And so what we found is a lot of our youth aren't able to, access a lot of the services that they have become accustomed to accessing, or they're available on a much more limited basis than they've become accustomed to. So we're still open, we're still doing our thing, and they know they can come to us and they can rely on us. So I think that's part of why we've seen the uptick in traffic, is we're still able to do most of the same things that we've been doing during these unprecedented times.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate that, you've seen an increase,
Sure.
but I'm glad that y'all are still open. So speaking of still being open, a lot of folks might be a little wary just because of safety risks and all of that. So talk a little bit about, how has the level of service or the delivery of service changed since the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the level of service hasn't changed. We've been able to do the same work, provide the same services. One thing, and I didn't mention this earlier, actually, we also have really close relationships with several partner agencies in Greenville, like Greater Greenville Mental Health and Switch and New Horizons. So prior to the pandemic, we would have them come in during designated drop-in days, and they would kind of set up shop and be available for people to access their services. So since the pandemic hit and a lot of things have shifted, those folks have not been here during drop-in hours. So we haven't had partner hours on site, but they're still readily available with a phone call. So we're still able to connect folks to those services if needed. They're just not on site the way that they were before. But we have adjusted, even though our service level hasn't changed, we have adjusted our service delivery to be more mindful and try to adhere to CDC guidelines and encourage social distancing and health practices to protect everybody that comes to the drop-in center. So we've been limiting the number of people who are in the drop-in center at a time. So it's only been 3 youth at a time, and then they access the services that they need. And then if somebody else needs to come in and access something, but that first person doesn't want to leave yet, we have a backyard that they can go in the back and hang out there and eat a piece of pizza or whatever else, and then come back in when it's safe and we have a reasonable number of folks in the drop-in center again. And then we've also implemented masks for everyone. So everybody that comes to the drop-in center has on a mask while they're here. I'm the only person here right now, which is why I don't have one on, but all staff wears face masks during drop-in hours, and all participants are required to wear face masks during drop-in hours. And we do have a good bit of flexibility and are willing to work with folks. And so let's say, you're someone who is immunocompromised, or maybe you're just really uncomfortable just showing up to a drop-in center unannounced, when you'd rather meet with somebody one-on-one, outside of drop-in days, like on a Tuesday at 10 o'clock in the morning, we can do our best to meet you. If you want to meet in person, if you just want to talk over the phone, we really want to do whatever we can to kind of meet you where you are, and make sure we do our best to support you in whatever areas you might need support. So if drop-in hours are not your thing, or if you're concerned about your own health and safety, don't let that be a barrier for you to get the help and services that you need, because we'll do what we can to reach you where you are.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
So just a couple of final questions, and be sure to get questions in if you want those answered. So if a youth needed your services at the Youth Resource Center, YRC, or a community member knew of a youth who could benefit, what's the process? And you talked about this a little bit earlier, but just reiterate, what's the process of accessing services?
Yeah, there's a couple options. They could just show up during drop-in hours, and that's certainly a viable option. But they can also contact us through the number that I gave earlier, the 516-1226. They're also welcome to email me, the letter J Crocker, CROCKER, at pendletonplace.org, and we'll get them connected to the appropriate resources. Whatever is most comfortable for someone. If they prefer to have a phone call first, if they prefer to email first, if they just want to show up, they're welcome to do so. And we'll do our best to accommodate as our schedule allows and as our staff is able to continue providing the same level of services at the drop-in center.
Great, thanks. And then just one final question. So are services at the YRC only for youth experiencing homelessness, or could a youth just be in, a really challenging spot and need some help setting direction and working on goals? Maybe they're sort of unstably housed. What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So we, the way that we kind of talk about our work and our target population is we say youth who are experiencing or at greater risk of homelessness, but we don't do any kind of screening to see if you're at risk of homelessness when you come into the YRC. So, if you just could use some additional supports, or if you are an LGBTQ youth who could use a little bit of guidance and helping, set some career goals, and you don't feel comfortable going anywhere else, you can come see us. We're not going to turn you away. We're not doing any kind of income check. We're not going to, make sure if you say that you're experiencing homelessness, that you actually stayed where you stayed last night. When you come to us, we trust that you are coming because you need something, and we want to do our best to meet that need and support you where you are, whatever that support need may be.
Awesome. Well, Josh, I really appreciate you taking the time. I think this information is really beneficial to folks, especially now. I know there's some service providers on this webinar as well. So yeah, thanks for the work that y'all are doing over at Pendleton Place. There's a special place in my heart for it, and the Youth Resource Center specifically. So, and I'm really grateful to have a community partner and a resource that is so affirming, like the Youth Resource Center. So
yeah, thanks for having
me. Appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, everybody for attending, and thanks for tuning in. And like I said, this is going to be recorded and sent out. So folks that weren't able to be here, you can share with your networks. So thanks, everybody.
All right. See ya.